The rain-soaked streets of Brooklyn glistened under the dim streetlights, but Amara's heart felt heavier than the storm clouds above. At 25, she carried the weight of a life stretched thin, working double shifts at a diner, chasing a dream of becoming a painter, and dodging the ghosts of a past that refused to stay buried. Today, her stomach growled louder than her pride, but the brown paper bag in her hand, holding her only meal of the day, wasn't for her. Amara spotted her in the park, an old woman frail and shivering under a tattered coat, sitting on a bench with a dazed look in her eyes. The woman's hands trembled as she muttered to herself, her words lost in the patter of rain. Amara's heart twisted. She knew hunger, knew loneliness, and something in the woman's vacant stare felt like a mirror to her own unspoken fears. Without a second thought, she crossed the muddy path, knelt beside the bench and offered her lunch, a sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. "Here, ma'am, you need this more than I do," she said softly, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. The old woman blinked, her cloudy eyes meeting Amara's. "You're kind, child," she whispered, her voice fragile but warm. "Like my Ellie used to be." Amara smiled, though the name stirred something in her. A fleeting memory of a girl she'd loved once, in a life that felt like someone else's. She stayed until the woman ate, then slipped away into the rain, her own hunger forgotten in the glow of that small act of kindness. The next morning, Amara woke to the sound of a car engine purring outside her cramped apartment. She peered through the blinds, her breath catching at the sight of a sleek black Bentley parked on her rundown street. A woman stepped out, her blonde hair catching the sunlight like a halo. She was polished, poised, and carried an air of quiet determination. Amara's heart raced. She didn't know this woman, but something about her felt familiar, like a song she'd heard in a dream. "Amara Jackson?" the woman asked, her voice smooth but tinged with urgency as she approached the door. "My name is Elise Harper. I need to talk to you about my grandmother, the woman you helped yesterday." Amara froze, her mind scrambling. How did this stranger know her name? And why did her eyes, a piercing shade of green, feel like they could see straight through her? Elise explained that her grandmother, Margaret, had Alzheimer's and had wandered from her care facility. The lunch Amara gave her wasn't just a meal. It was a moment of clarity for Margaret, who'd spoken of a kind girl with warm eyes, before slipping back into her fog. Elise's voice softened as she spoke, her gratitude laced with something deeper, something Amara couldn't place. "I've been looking for you," Elise said, her gaze lingering. "You don't know what you've done for her, for me." Amara invited Elise inside, her tiny apartment suddenly feeling smaller under the weight of Elise's presence. They sat across from each other at a wobbly kitchen table, the air thick with unspoken questions. Elise was 28, a lawyer who'd built a life of structure to cope with the chaos of her grandmother's illness. But beneath her polished exterior, Amara sensed a restlessness, a longing that mirrored her own. As they talked, the conversation drifted from Margaret to their own lives, Amara's art, Elise's late nights at the firm, the way they both felt like they were running from something. Hours passed like minutes, and when Elise finally stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "Can I see you again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara's heart thudded, caught between fear and a spark of something she hadn't felt in years. "Yeah," she said, her smile tentative but real. "I'd like that." That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She sketched furiously, her charcoal capturing Elise's eyes, the curve of her jaw, the way her presence had stirred something dormant in Amara's soul. She didn't know it yet, but that moment in the park had set something in motion. A collision of hearts that would unravel secrets, challenge fears, and rewrite the story of two women who thought they'd lost their chance at love. The next week felt like a fever dream for Amara. Elise called the day after their first meeting, her voice bright but nervous, inviting Amara to a small cafe in Manhattan. Amara arrived early, her paint-splattered jeans a stark contrast to the polished patrons around her. When Elise walked in wearing a tailored blazer and a smile that made Amara's knees weak, the world seemed to tilt. They talked over coffee that grew cold, their laughter weaving through stories of childhood dreams and adult disappointments. Elise's hand brushed Amara's as she reached for her cup, and the touch lingered, electric and unspoken. Their meetings became a rhythm, lunches in the park, late-night texts, a quiet evening at an art gallery where Amara's eyes lit up as she explained brushstrokes to Elise. Each moment deepened the pull between them, but Amara fought it. She'd loved a woman before, in college, and the rejection that followed had left scars she wasn't ready to reopen. Elise, too, carried her own hesitations. She'd dated women but never let herself fall, always prioritizing her career and her grandmother's care over her heart. One evening as they walked along the Hudson River, the city lights shimmering on the water, Elise stopped abruptly. "Amara," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what this is, but I feel it. Do you?" Amara's breath caught, her instinct to run warring with the warmth in Elise's eyes. She nodded, unable to speak, and Elise's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as the world faded away. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was a promise. A fragile, beautiful thread tying them together. Their connection grew, but so did the shadows. Amara learned more about Margaret, Elise's grandmother, whose Alzheimer's had stolen her memories but not her spirit. Margaret had been a civil rights activist in her youth, a fierce advocate for love and equality, and her stories stirred something in Amara. But Margaret's condition was worsening, and Elise's stress was palpable. Amara wanted to help, but she felt out of place in Elise's world of wealth and privilege, her own struggles as a Black woman in a city that often felt unkind weighing heavily on her. One night, Elise invited Amara to her grandmother's care facility. Margaret was having a rare lucid day, and when she saw Amara, her eyes sparkled. "You're the kind girl," she said, gripping Amara's hand. "You remind me of my Ellie when she was young, full of heart." Amara glanced at Elise, whose eyes were wet with tears, and felt a surge of protectiveness. She didn't know how to navigate this love, family, the weight of history, but she knew she wanted to try. As they left the facility, Elise stopped Amara under a streetlight. "You're changing everything," she whispered, her voice raw. "I've been so afraid to feel this, but with you I'm not." Amara's heart pounded, and before she could overthink it, she leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like coming home. It was soft, tentative, then fierce, a release of all the longing they'd both held back. But the next day, a letter arrived at Amara's apartment, an eviction notice. Her landlord was raising the rent, and with her diner wages and art dreams, she couldn't afford to stay. Panic set in, threatening to unravel the fragile hope she'd found with Elise. She didn't tell Elise, not yet, afraid to burden her with more. But as they grew closer, Amara knew she couldn't hide forever. Not from Elise, and not from the truth of who she was and what she wanted. The eviction notice sat like a stone in Amara's chest, but Elise's presence was a light she couldn't ignore. They spent every spare moment together, stealing kisses in quiet corners of the city, sharing dreams under starless Brooklyn skies. Amara's sketches now overflowed with Elise, her laugh, her intensity, the way she made Amara feel seen in a world that often looked past her. But the looming threat of losing her apartment gnawed at Amara, a reminder of the gap between their worlds. Elise noticed the strain in Amara's eyes but didn't push, sensing the walls Amara had built. Instead, she invited Amara to a fundraiser for Alzheimer's research, a glitzy event at a Manhattan hotel. Amara felt like an imposter among the tuxedos and champagne, her thrift store dress a stark contrast to Elise's elegant gown. Yet Elise never left her side, her hand a steady anchor as they navigated the room. "You belong here," Elise whispered, her breath warm against Amara's ear. "You belong with me." The night took a turn when an older man, a donor, made a snide comment about Amara's presence, his words dripping with prejudice. Elise's face hardened and she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the room as she defended Amara, calling out the man's bias with a fierceness that left Amara breathless. Later, in the hotel garden, Amara pulled Elise close. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I did," Elise replied, her eyes blazing. "I won't let anyone make you feel less than you are." Their bond deepened, but the cracks in Amara's life widened. She confided in Elise about the eviction, expecting pity but finding only resolve. "We'll figure this out," Elise said, her voice firm. She offered to help with the rent, but Amara's pride flared. She'd fought too hard to stand on her own. The tension lingered, a quiet storm brewing between love and independence. Days later, Margaret's condition took a sharp decline. Elise was devastated, spending long hours at the care facility, and Amara stayed by her side, holding her through tears and silences. One night, Margaret, in a fleeting moment of clarity, pulled Amara close. "Love her," she whispered, her frail hand trembling. Don't let fear win. The words hit Amara like a tidal wave, stirring memories of her own mother, who died when Amara was a teenager, leaving her to navigate a world that often felt too big. Amara began to open up to Elise about her past, her mother's death, her struggles as a Black queer woman, the dreams she buried under survival. Elise listened, her heart breaking and mending with every word. You're not alone anymore, she said, pulling Amara into her arms. But even as their love grew, the eviction deadline loomed, and Amara faced a choice. Accept Elise's help or risk losing everything she'd built. One evening, as they sat in Amara's apartment surrounded by her paintings, Elise proposed a plan. Move in with me, she said, her voice steady but vulnerable. Not because you have to, but because I want a life with you. Amara's breath hitched, her heart torn between fear of losing herself and the pull of a future with Elise. She didn't answer, not yet, but the seed was planted. A vision of a life where love didn't mean losing who she was. Amara stood at a crossroads, her heart a battlefield of hope and fear. Elise's offer to move in together hung in the air, a promise of love wrapped in the risk of dependence. Amara had always prided herself on her resilience, on carving a life from nothing, but Elise's love was a force she hadn't anticipated. A tide pulling her toward a future she both craved and feared. They spent days navigating the tension, their conversations raw and real. Elise shared her own fears, of losing her grandmother, of failing to live up to the legacy of a woman who'd fought for justice. Amara saw herself in Elise's vulnerability, in the way they both carried burdens too heavy for one heart. One night, as they lay on Amara's lumpy couch, Elise traced the lines of Amara's palm. I don't want to fix your life, she said softly. I just want to build one with you. Amara's resistance began to crack. She took Elise to her favorite spot, a quiet rooftop in Brooklyn where she painted her first mural, a vibrant explosion of color that told her story of survival. This is me, Amara said, her voice trembling. All the pain, all the hope. If I move in with you, I need to know I won't lose this. Elise's eyes softened, and she kissed Amara's forehead. You won't, she promised. I love every piece of you. The decision wasn't easy, but Amara agreed to move in. Not as a surrender but as a leap of faith. They found a small apartment in Harlem, a compromise between Elise's world and Amara's roots. The move was chaotic, boxes of paints, Elise's law books, and Margaret's old photos mingling in a space that felt like theirs. But as they unpacked, Amara's eviction fears faded, replaced by the warmth of building something together. Margaret's health continued to decline, and Elise leaned on Amara more than ever. One afternoon, they took Margaret to the park where Amara had first met her. The old woman's eyes lit up at the sight of the bench, and for a moment she seemed to remember. You too, she said, her voice faint but clear. You're what love looks like. Amara's throat tightened and Elise squeezed her hand, their shared grief and love intertwining. But the world wasn't done testing them. At a gallery where Amara's art was displayed, a critic dismissed her work as urban cliché, his words cutting deep into her insecurities. Elise was furious, ready to confront the critic, but Amara stopped her. Let me fight this one, she said, her voice steady. She poured her pain into a new painting, a bold piece that captured her identity, Black, queer, unapologetic. When it sold at the gallery for a staggering sum, Amara felt a shift. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. As winter settled over the city, Amara and Elise grew stronger, their love a quiet rebellion against a world that often tried to tear them down. They faced prejudice together, stares in restaurants, whispers at events, but each challenge only deepened their bond. Amara began to see a future where her art and Elise's advocacy could change lives, just as Margaret's had. Spring arrived in New York, and with it a bittersweet turning point. Margaret's health had deteriorated to the point where she rarely recognized Elise, but her spirit lingered in the stories she'd told and the love she'd inspired. One quiet morning, she passed away in her sleep, leaving Elise and Amara to navigate a world without her. At the funeral, Amara stood by Elise's side, her hand a steady anchor as Elise spoke of her grandmother's legacy. A life of fighting for justice, of loving fiercely despite the odds. In the weeks that followed, Amara and Elise leaned into their grief, finding solace in each other. They created a scholarship in Margaret's name, funding young artists and activists who shared her vision of equality. Amara's art became the centerpiece of the initiative, her paintings telling stories of resilience and love that resonated across communities. Elise, inspired by Amara's passion, began volunteering at a local LGBTQ+ center, using her legal skills to advocate for those who felt voiceless. Their love, once fragile, had grown into something unbreakable. They faced the world together. Its beauty, its cruelty, its endless possibilities. One evening, as they sat on their Harlem balcony, Amara pulled out a sketch she'd been working on, a portrait of them with Margaret, their faces bathed in light. "This is us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is what she gave us." Elise's eyes glistened and she pulled Amara close, their lips meeting in a kiss that held all their shared pain and joy. The luxury car that had stopped at Amara's door a year ago had been more than a moment. It was the start of a journey. From a single act of kindness in a rain-soaked park, Amara and Elise had built a life rooted in love, resilience, and the courage to be themselves. They weren't perfect, and the world wasn't either, but together they were unstoppable. As they looked out over the city, Amara thought of Margaret's words. "Don't let fear win." She hadn't. They hadn't. And in that moment, with Elise's hand in hers, Amara knew they never would. Their love was a testament to the power of connection, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, a single act of kindness could change everything.